Just a note about today. If you don't know, as well as being rector of this fine parish, I'm also the Episcopal campus minister to the University of Washington, and I share that wonderful ministry with Elizabeth Rawlings, my Lutheran co-pastor in our linked Lutheran Episcopal campus ministry called The Sanctuary. So Elizabeth, we get the privilege of her presence a couple times a year here to preach and to talk a little bit about campus ministry and that wonderful opportunity we have to accompany people in that little chunk of time between about 18 and 25. So this is one of those great Sundays where we get Elizabeth. Please welcome her.
Please be seated. Good morning. I pray that those of you who took time and celebrated Thanksgiving this weekend had a wonderful celebration. And if you didn't, if the holidays are a time that cause you pain or grief or they just kind of stink, I pray that you can find some hope and comfort and love in this space and in your days as you go forward. I was on Twitter yesterday, which I do too often, and one of my colleagues mentioned that this is kind of like Christian New Year's Eve, because this is our last Sunday in our liturgical season, and we get to start Advent, which is so fun and filled with hope and anticipation, and we talk about joy, and we wait for the coming of Christ. But as we build up to that season, we finished the season of Pentecost with many readings about judgment, readings that are apocalyptic, and they can be hard for us to deal with. This Sunday is Christ the King Sunday, when we celebrate the kingship of Jesus Christ. And I have a lot of colleagues and friends who are not huge fans of talking about Christ as King or Christ as Lord. I know places that remove that language from their liturgy because of the way that kings and lords have behaved historically, of the oppression that kings often bring onto spaces, and the way that colonialism happens. And yet that's, to me, precisely the reason it's important to talk about Christ as King. I have been working to bring back this language in my own setting and in my own life. And I'm doing this because we live in a time of rampant nationalism. We live in a time where it is more important to some people who call themselves Christians for the party that they are a part of to get elected than to stand up for women and children. We live in a time when we are more concerned about our own privilege as American citizens than we are to take care of those who are undocumented. We live in a time where a piece of cloth is more important to respect than human bodies. We have lifted up nationalism over faith in so many parts of our society. And so it is important to bring back, for me anyway, this language of Christ as King, of Christ as ruler. Because it is to Christ we as Christians owe our allegiance over and above and beyond any nation, any president, any ruler. It is Christ's instructions on how to live life that we are to follow. So who is this king? Who is this king that we follow? What does this look like? In a world where our rulers are decorated with gold bathrooms, have the power to oppress and use it mightily, who is our king that stands above these earthly rulers? When I was in high school, I got really into these books. They're called the Joshua novels. They're by a Catholic priest, and it's like this super hippie, warm and fuzzy version of Jesus that I still love. It's like if you were to picture him, he'd have birds on his shoulders, and he's always drawing everyone in, and he doesn't really seem to get angry. He's more like the disappointed parent. Like, you should go think about what you've done for a little while. And then I went back and I read the Gospels. And the Jesus that I read there, he got angry. He was cranky. I'm fairly sure he was sarcastic. There's no sarcastic biblical font, but I feel like it's in there somewhere. He fought hard for the people who lived on the outside. He yelled. He tore things up. He yelled at the authorities. Now, the construction that I had of Jesus from the Joshua novels, probably informed by the fact that I am a Lutheran pastor, and I was born and raised Lutheran, and we talk about grace more than just about anything else. This construction isn't a bad construction of Jesus, it's just incomplete. We have to have the full picture of the Jesus that broadens the kingdom, the Jesus that forgives, the Jesus that gave his life so that all might live, and the Jesus that calls us to live differently, the Jesus that calls us to sacrifice ourselves, the Jesus that calls out for justice. This Jesus of love and grace and justice is the Jesus that the students who are coming to us crave. The emphasis on grace and on love and on always opening up and forgiving is so important to some of our students, many of whom come from backgrounds that are Catholic or evangelical, who were raised in congregations or families where you had to earn God's love, where you had to behave a certain way in order to be accepted in your community and therefore by God. We have students who are still really excited that they can come to communion no matter how bad they were the night before. Shouldn't say bad, no matter what choices they made the night before. At the beginning, some of our students would come up and not want to take communion because they didn't feel as though they were clean enough to do that. They didn't feel as though they deserved it. And the look on their faces when they tell them, no, this meal is for everybody. You don't earn it, you don't deserve it. They get so excited. It's really cool. And so this emphasis on love and grace and getting messages from students that are like, wait, does God really love me all the time? It's so exciting. But there is also this other part of Jesus. This Jesus that says to those at his left hand, you are accursed. Depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And that is a Jesus that many of us struggle with. There are a lot of stories about Christ as king, about what this kingship looks like. What does this story that we have from Matthew's gospel today tell us about our king? It tells us that our king is found on the margins, that our king is found in the homeless man, Adi, who lives on the front porch of the sanctuary, as he tries to get a green card so that he can get a job. It tells us that Christ can be found in the kids hanging out on the Ave looking for some food and a place to eat. My friend Lenny spoke this week about when he was homeless as a teenager, where he saw Christ that touched him most deeply was at a subway stop where he frequently slept in Philadelphia. It was also the sleeping space of many of the homeless trans black women in the neighborhood. And they took him under their wing and cared for him and tried to keep him safe. And so for him, frequently he sees Christ in the face of homeless, transgender black women. When I was growing up, I saw Christ in the face of a neighbor of mine. He and his partner were both HIV positive, and he dedicated his life to working with other people who were HIV positive until the day he died. He was blind, he could barely walk, but he still did everything that he could to care for others. We see Christ in prison. The faces of those who have been put there, all too often because of the color of their skin and not their crime. We see God in detention centers, where people who came here for work or for family are stuck without lawyers and without care. We see Christ, our King, in the faces of black and brown bodies that lie in the streets, murdered by a system that sees them as the enemy. That is where our King lies. That is where our King stands. Our King doesn't stand in gilded mansions. Our King doesn't have gold bathrooms or private jets. Our King does not make laws or choices that harm the least of these to benefit the powerful. Our King is in the least of these. Our King is in the homeless, the hungry, the thirsty. Our King is in those who are in prison. Our King is in those who are diseased, who have mental illness. Our King is in those whose sexual orientations and genders go outside of what our society considers to be normal or okay. Our King is in the faces of those we tend to turn away from. This section of Matthew's Gospel is the part of the Bible that runs through my head most frequently. I feel almost cursed by a recording of this stuck in the back of my brain as I walk down the Ave. What I hear is, just as you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me. I am convicted each and every time I walk past a homeless person, a hungry person, a person asking me for help that I am too prideful, too ashamed, too uncomfortable to look at or talk to. And I know that that is Jesus. And I walk away, and in my head, all I can hear is God saying, "You walked past me. You ignored me." I have friends who are not Christian who say things like, "Oh, you're Christian because it makes life so much easier. You have this hope and this belief in life after death and stuff." And I'm like, I wish that was what it gave me, but mostly it just tells me that I need to be helping people more. I hear Jesus calling me constantly to be doing the work, to be visiting the prisoner, to be feeding the hungry. Who is our King? And how do we honor that King? If our King is a stranger, if our King is a prisoner, if our King is a homeless person, what do we do with kings? We lift them up. We listen to what they have to say. We let them take the lead. This is our call, to lift up our King, our powerless King, our King who died at the hands of the state, our King who is right now rotting away in prison. We lift up our King and listen to our King's voice. One of the other difficult things about this passage is the fact that there is punishment for not seeing Christ in these people. There is punishment for not giving Christ something to drink when we walk past him on the street. And this is really hard for people like me to deal with, who would much rather focus on happy heaven stuff and grace than punishment. And I don't know if the eternal fire is a lifelong experience where we, by ignoring our siblings, become separated from God and separated from ourselves and separated from the body of Christ. Or if it is something that happens after this place. I don't know. But I am called to not find out. We are called to do this work, to serve, to see Christ in the face of all that we meet, especially those we would rather look away from, especially those who are difficult. We are called to lift this Christ up as King, to lift up our powerless King as a counter-narrative to what the world tells us about what a king is, and to keep this King in mind as our King, that Christ is the ruler that we follow, that our nation is all of creation. Our call is to follow this King, Christ. Amen.